Welcome to day 230 on the trail. We have three readings for today from James chapter 2 verses 1 through 26, Isaiah chapter 12 verse 1 through 16:13, and 2nd Esdras chapter 5 verse 41 through 6:34. Years ago, I heard this question asked during a message on Sunday morning. If you were put on trial for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict? I do not remember where or when I first heard this question, but it has stuck with me. Does my life bear witness to my faith in Christ? Do my words, my actions, my attitude? If my screen time were brought forward as evidence, would it be evidence for or against me? In a sense, this is the question that James is asking at the outset of his letter. From James chapter 1, beginning in verse 22. But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror. For they look at themselves and, on going away, immediately forget what they were like. So what do we see when we look in the mirror? Does what we see there reflect our true identity as followers of Jesus? Do we live what we claim to believe? Earlier on the trail, we discussed two Latin phrases that capture James' point. The first, fides quae, literally means faith that. So in our case, it means that I have faith that Jesus is the Christ. The second, fides qua, literally means faith by which. So in this case, I have faith by which I respond to Jesus, the Christ. I believe that James is telling us that we cannot say that we truly have faith that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, without living out that faith in real, practical, visible ways. Faith is far more than having the right theological answers. True faith structures our world and forms the foundation of our decisions. In our reading for today, James continues to emphasize the importance of demonstrating our faith through actions. That is, what we in fact do. From James chapter 2, beginning in verse 14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill, and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I, by my works, will show you my faith. You believe that God is one. You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. For James, faith always shows itself in action. And the example James gives in verse 19 is powerful. At the time of this writing, 2026, 74 to 83% of Americans believe in God. 76% believe that Jesus was a historical person. But 100% of demons believe that God is one. It is one thing to believe. Even the demons do that. It is another thing to live by that belief, to shape your life by it, to let your faith in Jesus direct and guide and drive your life, to make a difference with the time you and I have. Now, this view is not unfamiliar in the New Testament. Consider the following examples. From John chapter 13, verse 17. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. John 15:2. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. Matthew 5:16. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. As we mentioned in the introduction to James, there has been some questions regarding the emphasis James places on works and the centrality that Paul places on grace. This has led many Christians to consider the two at odds with each other. However, I do not believe that this is the case at all. So here, I would like to recall the Pauline circle that we explored in our readings of Paul's letters. We start by recalling Paul's letter to the Ephesian church. Ephesians chapter 2, beginning in verse 4. But God, who is rich in mercy, out of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead through our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the ages to come he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness toward us in Christ Jesus. Here, Paul reminds us that we were dead, but God gave us life. That is, we were completely helpless. But God's love initiated a rescue mission, which Paul calls grace. Paul sums up his view on the centrality of grace in the following verses. Ephesians 2, beginning in verse 8. For by grace you have been saved, through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one may boast. These two verses have tragically divided Christians and split entire churches and denominations. The debate surrounding these verses revolves around the relationship between grace, faith, and the work we are called to do as outlined by James. As I mentioned earlier, I believe that there is a false dichotomy that has been created here. Consider again where Paul starts. You and I were dead, but God did something. Why is Paul reminding them and us of this very basic truth? Because far too often we forget where our story really started. We can quickly forget that we were dead before God stepped in. And forgetting that can lead to tremendous problems. In fact, look again at the end of verses 8 and 9. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one may boast. Boasting was a major problem which Paul addresses throughout his writings. Why? Because boasting puts our accomplishments ahead of God's power and grace. If we define ourselves by our accomplishments, by what we do, then other people become competition or even threats. In the Pauline circle, we find a helpful model for the relationship between grace, faith, and works. Here, everything begins with grace. Our faith is a result of God's grace and the faithfulness of Jesus. And God's grace and our faith in Christ leads us to respond in works of love for the kingdom. Grace is the point of initiation. Grace leads to our works, but never excludes them. Also, our works can never lead to God's grace. Therefore, we have no cause to boast of our works. Instead, God's grace always comes first for Paul. It is through grace that we were saved. We who were dead have been made alive again, and we have been given a mission and a purpose to go and produce good fruit for the kingdom. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.